Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you for the Providence traffic for finally letting up. I know it was meant to have been really bad earlier this evening. My name is Parker Van Valkenburg, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Brown and to the Watson Institute. I am the acting director of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies here within Watson. And we're so honored to be co-sponsoring this event, bringing together Marcela Betancur, Executive Director of the Latino Policy Institute, Sandra Cano, Director of Commerce of the City of Pawtucket, and Domingo Morel, Associate Professor of Political Science and Public Service at New York University and at Brown University, PhD graduate from 2014, in conversation with current Brown University Professor Marques Zárate of Brown's Department of Political Science. Brown has a long and complex history tying the university to Latin America, and it began in the 19th century when we began welcoming faculty to teach Spanish and Portuguese, and also students. But it wasn't until the 1970s that Latin American Studies was formally organized at the university. It was in 1972 that a group of faculty formed the Latin American Studies Committee and advocated for a concentration in Latin American studies, which was approved in 1973. So we've just completed our 50th anniversary, and we've got at least one undergraduate concentrator in the room right now. Since that time, the LACA concentration has continuously served a host of undergraduates from a wide variety of backgrounds and disciplines. And 11 years later, in 1984, the Center for Latin American Studies class was founded as the first area studies center at Brown through the initiative of a group of faculty in the humanities and social sciences, with Professor of Hispanic Studies Pepe Amori Vasquez as its first director. In 2002, class took up residence in the newly established Watson Institute for International Affairs. Today, one of CLACS's core principles is that the United States is both historically and contemporarily not just interwoven with Latin America, but very much a part of the region. And that's certainly true of Providence. In addition to Brazilian, Francophone, and Anglophone Caribbean communities, fully 43% of the population of Providence identified as Hispanic in the 2020 US Census. Beyond our city, the Hispanic population of the Providence Metropolitan Statistical Area has grown by 95% since 2000, from approximately 118,000 people to over 230,000 people, and comprises a series of diverse communities from throughout the region. CLACS seeks to support research with and serve these communities. And this event is a wonderful opportunity for people within CLACS and in adjacent centers to learn more about how we can and should contribute meaningful research and form new partnerships along these lines. So it's my pleasure to introduce the true star of the Brown team today, Marques Zárate, who is Assistant Professor of Political Science at Brown and received his PhD in 2023 from Rice University in Houston, Texas. Dr. Zárate's research focuses broadly on the role of race and identity in the formation of political attitudes, including recent work on how people evaluate politicians who use identity-based appeals. For example, he's examined how Hispanics use variation in the accent and quality of candidates' Spanish language appeals to judge the ability and willingness of those candidates to represent Hispanic voters. This work is published in articles, including the 2023 article, Dimensions of Pandering Perceptions Among Hispanic Americans and Their Effort on Political Trust, which was published in the journal Political Communication, and Se Habla Español, Spanish Language Appeals and Candidate Evaluations in the United States, and the American Political Science Review, as well as numerous working papers. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Zárate and also our speakers for today.
Thank you so much, Parker. Before we get started, I kind of want to just lay the foundation for what the goal of this panel is going to be. So first off, thank you so much for everyone joining me. I'll try to make this quick, just given the we're starting out late. So the goal of this panel, or at least the theme of it, is Pioneers of Change Shaping the Future Together. And a lot of the motivation for this comes from, Brown's stated commitment towards wanting to work in community-engaged research. And as Parker was talking about, the inherent nature, how many Hispanics are within Providence and Rhode Island in general. So when you take a look at Brown University's strategic plan, it outlines the goals and aspirations of the university. So the university creates a strategic plan as a way of sustaining and advancing a record of excellence and influence in the world. When you go through the plan, a few things stand out that I think are pertinent for today's conversation. So in particular, if you look at the second page of the plan, it states that Brown will strengthen our ties to our city and state. In the section on integrative growth, the plan mentions the importance of promoting social justice and economic prosperity domestically and internationally, and exploring the human experience more broadly. In the next section, we see that the plan mentions a priority to provide Brown students with opportunities to work with faculty and community practitioners on pressing local and global issues. And the final section starts off by stating that Brown's strength is based on the talent of faculty, staff, and students working with local and global partners. And so when you read the strategic plan, I think one thing that you can kind of take away from that is that Brown has a stated commitment to working with Rhode Island. But you can't really talk about Rhode Island without thinking about the Hispanic population in it. And so the reason why we need these excellent panelists here is because as a newcomer, I really can't speak to a lot of the things going on in Rhode Island. And so I need the opportunity to learn from these people who have been working in this area for years. So knowing this, it kind of setting the stage for the topic of today's panel. And so how can Brown best fulfill its commitment to the Providence and Rhode Island community, and particularly the Hispanic population present here? So all too often when we're talking about community-engaged research or community-based research, universities with good intentions might have a habit of helicoptering down and just kind of like telling what the community wants. But one of the central tenets of community-engaged research is to work with the actual community. And so to help us today, we have several people who are currently working or have worked with the community in the past. We've already had the chance to introduce them. So I'm going to kind of just go straight into the questions for today. And so the first question, and any of you can kind of speak to this, but I think to begin the conversation, it's important to understand the Hispanic population here in Rhode Island. And so in particular, in all of your work, both as a politician and in these policy institutions, can you talk a bit about how, can you talk about, I guess, what Hispanics in Rhode Island or Providence more generally are talking about? What are the issues that are important to them? And does there appear to be a shared sense of what the important issues are? If not, then can you maybe talk a little bit about how they differ? And
you guys got this.
Do they want to self-introduce?
Oh, sure.
Oh, sure.
Marcela, Betancur, the Executive Director of Latino Policy Institute. And I'll start, I think, to your question, in Rhode Island and in Providence. So I'll focus first in Providence, if that's okay, and maybe we'll make it a little larger since we have other non-Providence people. I think when it comes to, first I want to start by saying and reminding us constantly, like, the Latinos are not a monolith. I remind myself that every time. My experience as a Latina and as an immigrant is very different than Sandra's and everybody else's and Domingo's and many of you. Today, and the second part is also what the issues of Latinos in Providence are today, in one way or another, may not be that different than 20, 30 years ago, but they are starting to also be shaped in a different way based on the generation of Latinos that we're having. And I mean that by, either newcomers or first generation, et cetera. I think in 2024, the major issues that we're seeing for Latinos that they're experiencing is the high cost of life, of just living. And that's sadly not something that's very new or different from everywhere else that we're seeing. Nevertheless, in the city of Providence, the average income of Latinos, and actually the state, continues to lag like horribly behind everyone else's. I think the last time I looked at it is the average income of a Latino family is about $47,000 a year. And that is a lot. That's much lower that's in 2019 when I started this job. That was the average income for a family in Rhode Island, a white family in Rhode Island, and that was really bad. Today, that's what we are today. So we made it. We made it a little further than white people were 5 years ago, and it's now a huge burden. I also, we can't talk about Latinos in Providence without talking about the vast inequities in education and quality education access that the state and the city have really completely defunded our district and really impacted lives of tiny humans who are going through these districts for many decades. So I think I also mentioned the different generations of Latinos because, again, in the work that I've experienced at the Latino Policy Institute, it does differ. We do see Latinos of different generations that have higher degrees and have higher incomes. Nevertheless, they are experiencing also housing burden. They are experiencing issues with even community sort of finding community, and I think that's something that's really important. In the state in general, we are seeing within the Latino community, again, the high cost of life. But one of the things that we are also not talking about as much as we should is health inequities. This was talked about a lot during the pandemic, and we were able, and with our Sandra Cano, our former Senator Sandra Cano, we did a lot of work around health equities impacting Latinos and other people. But it is something, and when I say health inequities, I think of just accessing a doctor in the state of Rhode Island is nearly impossible today. It is also nearly impossible depending on where you live and what your income is. Also just affording medicine. So those are, don't want to take too much time, but those are some of the bigger things that we're looking at right now.
And I think that Marcela really covered a lot of the issues that the Latinos face today in Rhode Island. But what I would say, my name is Sandra Cano, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you, Marcela and Domingo, great colleagues that have done amazing work in the space of policy and beyond education. So selfishly, as a former chair of the Senate Education Committee, I think that one of the issues in the state that we really need to continue talking about that affects Latinos is clearly the education inequities that goes from early education to post-secondary education. And then so while we always think that education really can shape and really help people's life be different, I would say that my example is one that I often put in perspective for people. I didn't know how to speak English when I came here 24 years ago from Colombia, an immigrant that flew from violence and came under political asylum, not having anyone. And it was really the opportunities of education that allowed me to then be contributing back. But because of those experiences, I know what it takes to be in a place where I didn't have people having the voice for me or my parents, right? And then so those policies really are real. In today's states, I would say landscape of leaders are still real. Like I would say that our elected officials really don't reflect the diversity of our population, and that really shapes policy in a way that is not equitable. One thing that I would say that is certainly a challenge is that a lot of our immigrant population in the state that have degrees in their own countries are not able to transfer those skills in the current economy, to Marcela's point. So their income level that should be better and that we could in the state welcome in and make it easier for them is actually very challenging. And one of the things that Marcela didn't touch upon, but I think is also very real, is the lack of opportunities for accessible, high-quality child care in the state. And the pandemic really taught us how this was a crisis and a problem that we had before the pandemic, but rather the lack of investment on that area and the lack of support for the early educators had made it impossible for many families to go back to work. And then so that is one of the biggest challenge that I see. And then just to end, to make sure that Dr. Morel has a chance to talk, is that now we shape, our Latino community is shaped in a different way. So now we have generations that have come and have been established here. So while my parents work in factories, now the new generation of Latinos really are the business owners of the future of this country. So one of the things is access to really opportunities to capital and access to opportunities for entrepreneurs to be able to see themselves on opening and owning business here. And then we have great success, but we have lack of opportunities that really connect the ideas with the reality for people and Latinos in Rhode Island when it comes to a small business in the state. Although I have to say that I'm very proud, and Marcela is probably the same as proud as I am, to see that the largest Chamber of Commerce in the state is the Latino and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce that have over 1,000 members, which if you look at that alone, you will see what the future is going to be. So we really need to concentrate on investing in what the future of the state is going to look like. This is right now.
Domingo Morel, associate professor at NYU, a graduate of Brown University, as I was already mentioned. So I want to pick up on both of you mentioned it. No surprise, I'm going to mention it as well, about education. So yes, I'm in New York now, but I lived in Rhode Island for a long time, and for much longer than I was here at Brown. And I was as a community organizer, was involved with organizing campaigns for education here in the state of Rhode Island. And so, although I'm no longer here, still very much engaged on education issues, and I've been working with Latino Policy Institute and some other organizations around education. And so one of the things I think is really important, and it's highlighted here on this panel, so what Senator Cano, or former Senator Cano, did not mention was that she, unless I'm mistaken, your first political office was as a school board member, right? Her first office was a school board member, and that is what happens in most communities of color, particularly Black and Latino communities, is that communities gain their ability to influence their communities and make decisions for their communities through the schools. And it always starts with the school board level. The city of Providence has not had the ability to control its schools for more than 3 decades. So we're focused now, most recently, on the state takeover, but we've had mayoral control of schools. Were you an elected member in Pawtucket? You were elected by the people of Pawtucket to represent them. Providence has not had that. I just celebrated, I was telling folks on the panel, people outside, I was here this weekend because I was celebrating my 30th year reunion. I graduated from Central High School here in Providence. And none of us who graduated from that class, even before that and since then, have attended a public school system where we can say we have been successful in providing a great education, or that the community has been responsible for the education of its citizens, of its children. We just haven't, right? And so I think it's really important for us to understand, and when we're thinking about the Latino community, that the reason why there is a state takeover of the Providence schools is because those who are in power do not think that the Latino community is able to govern itself. And we need to be very clear about that. It's a racist idea. And I'm saying that not only because I graduated from the Providence Public Schools, have been doing organizing within the Providence Public Schools, but I wrote a book on state takeovers of local schools. And so I've studied state takeovers over the past, that happened over the past 30 years. And they do not work. When we mean by work, meaning do they improve school outcomes? They don't. But they are very highly effective in disempowering communities. And so if we want the Providence Public Schools to achieve what we hope and it's capable of achieving, the number one ingredient is that communities need to be, and particularly because Latinos represent the majority of the community and of the public school population in the city of Providence, that you can't arrive at any solutions, you can't address the issues if the community is not part of that equation. Just like Senator Cano was part of the equation in helping address the needs of the Pawtucket school population, the same thing needs to happen in the city of Providence. And so there's more to be said about that, but because that's where I've been most connected with, and particularly in the city of Providence, I just wanted to make sure that I
Can I just add one thing? Sure. And that's the reason why when there were 2 openings for college presidents in the state of Rhode Island for CCRA and Rhode Island College, the first call that I did as a Senate Chair of Education was to Dr. Morel. I was like, we really need you back in Rhode Island, and we need you to be a president of these universities. And he declined. How is that possible? But I did call her. I was like, how? I was like, well, we need you here.
Well, I really appreciate that. That was really nice of you.
I just wanted to put it on the record. Just need him back.
That's good.
Need him back.
And I appreciate you both bringing up education. I actually had a few questions on this exact topic, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of like skip around from like the original plan. But as you're just mentioning, Professor Morel, the majority of Providence Public School District students are Latino. So 65%, according to their website, identify as Latino. Meanwhile, 40% of Providence is Latino. So we know it's a young population. So we're talking about the future of Rhode Island or the future of Providence. We are talking about a Latino population. And so with that in mind, what are some things that you would tell the students in these organizations in order to not try to like accumulate power? What would you tell these politicians? Like how, if you're talking about how in 30 years they've never been able to control their schools. So what is the path forward? Is it just more community engagement or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so I think one of the things, as a Latino community, we also need to understand that no one is going to run the schools better than we are. Mm-hmm. And I share this because there is this idea, rightfully so in so many ways, because people have never governed their own schools, that somebody else is responsible for governing, right? Whether it's the mayor being responsible, the state being responsible, everyone is responsible but us. And so I think it starts with the communities being able to articulate on their own terms what it is to govern their own schools, and happening right now, right? Not 2 years from now, not 5 years from now. Democracy is messy, and you can't, there's no perfect democracy. I mean, you know, anyone wants to pay attention to what's happening in Congress, you know, it's messy. No matter where you go, at the state level, every single state politics is messy. Every single locality politics are messy. And so we need to get away from this idea that there's this perfect way to govern anything. It just doesn't exist, right? And so that's number one. And then to those policymakers, including within our own Latino community, to be able to tell them to push for their constituents, not, you know, others, right? To push for their communities to be able to govern themselves. And then finally, you know, and I don't think it needs to be said, because when the state takeover initially happened, you know, the only organized group of people who fought against it were the students. So what I would just say is, I don't think we need to tell the students anything. I think we need to listen to the students because they're the ones who have been fighting for something different rather than, you know, a status quo, right?
And just to add to that, I think that we have a powerful voice when we unite and organize. I would say that the most effective policies that have come out of the General Assembly or even the local school boards or the city councils have been when the community really come and speak up. And the problem is that we're really afraid to do so because we don't think that we belong in those spaces as a community. And it is powerful. Like I made it a point as a chair of education to make sure that all parents would come in front of my committee when I was the chair and speak in their own languages. And I, as a chair, would translate for my colleagues. I was like, yeah, this is what these parents are all saying. And we need to make sure that we open more spaces like that. I think it's crazy, and there is a bill in the General Assembly, and Marcela knows. I think it's crazy that we still don't have translators at the General Assembly when the Rhode Island House of Representatives and the Senate like really cover a whole state that is extremely diverse. And it was costly, but let's talk about this. When we go to the doctors in the emergency room, they now have translators that are over the phone, FaceTiming, and just doing it in real time. Like a service like that is not that crazy. And the bill really says, give us 48 hours to find your language. Why not do that? That is the access that these people need to be able to speak about the needs of the communities that we really represent. So those little things, I believe, that are the most powerful to pass legislation that makes significant waves when it comes to school and education equity.
Yeah, I have nothing else to add. That was great.
One other thing I would like to add, you know, the city of Providence also has one of the widest teaching forces not only in the state of Rhode Island, in the country, right? And so what that means is when you have a high immigrant population, Latino population, English is not the first language. It just creates barriers between the parents, the communities, and the teachers. And we know there's a ton of research showing that when the more teachers of color you have in your district, in your schools, the more the better students do. Not just Latino students, not just Black students, all students benefit from having teachers of color. And we just need to do a better job of that. That's not a Providence Teachers Union issue. It's not even the Providence issue. It's a state issue. It comes from the State Board of Education and the universities and the terms of the policies that they have that are just not developing teachers of color, particularly Latino teachers here in the state of Rhode Island. And so one of the, speaking back to the policy questions, one of the things that we need to do a much better job at is developing teachers of color to be able to teach in our schools, not just in Providence, but in Pawtucket and Central Falls and other communities as well.
And we are currently operating on a funding formula that was done 13 years ago. And you just said it. The population of Rhode Island looks very different than 13 years ago. So that means that the funding formula that we operated on is really not reflected of the needs of the schools. So like the fact that last year, like we have to fight for English language learners to get a categorical in the budget is insane to me. Like I just continuously and I'm in a position. I was in a position of influence, and the fight and the like really conversations. There was really not understandings across the board, and my colleagues really do not understand the importance of making sure that we evaluate that it takes 3 times more to educate an English language learner, a student, than a regular student. So if we're not given the resources, then we already failing our system across the board. So education, investment, and the funding formula, and it all comes together with the same equity issue that we're talking about.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I do want to return to this conversation at some point, but just for the sake of time, I want to kind of go back to the original topic. And one thing I want to talk about is the Latino Policy Institute. And in particular, getting back into, what Brown University's role might potentially be, trying to understand these questions and maybe trying to think about, okay, what are the best ways to try to, hire more teachers of color, things like that. But, taking a step back, so from my understanding, the Latino Policy Institute was originally associated with Roger Williams University. And to my understanding, it no longer is. So please correct me if that's correct. But I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the Institute was actually founded, how its goals have changed over time, and then what you've learned about engaging with the Latino population in Rhode Island more generally.
So we have one of our founders, so it's perfect.
Yeah, but you could talk about it.
Perfect. Yeah, so we were founded 19 years ago. It'll be 20 years next year. So we're throwing a big 20th party next year. That was part of your question. I got focused on the thing. I'm sorry, can you repeat that? And yes, we're not part of Roger Williams University. We are an independent nonprofit.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about, how the Institute was founded, what people were talking about then, how maybe its goals have changed over time, as you all have worked with the community longer, and then what you've learned about engaging with the Latino population in Rhode Island.
So as I said, when it was founded 19 years ago, from the documents, the very, very thoughtful documents that I've been able to read, as I said earlier, sadly, 20 years ago, the issues that the Latino community was facing were not that much different. While the population was was a little bit smaller, it was actually, and I thought this was really interesting. So in 2020, the Rhode Island population was able to actually save 2 congressional seats. And for a couple of decades, we've been able to do that thanks to Latinos and immigrants. So I say you welcome every time, there's a 2nd congressional seat. And at the time, our founders and other community leaders came together because of the same issues that we just said. Education continues to be, the divestment education continued to be stagnant. The small businesses, as Sandra mentioned earlier, the Latinos not only in the state but in the country have the largest small businesses, and so at the time they were through Roger Williams University and other national and local funders, they were able to really look at why can we have a center that looks specifically at Latino organizations? In the state of Rhode Island, we're very fortunate to have policy and advocacy organizations that focus on different areas around income inequalities, around children. But we did not have a space that looked like us, that felt like us. And in the last 6 years that I've been there, but just in the 19 years that I've been there, we have focused again in higher education, adult education, small businesses. We've actually done reports with Brown University around teachers of color and the incredible need for it. In the last 6 years, part of what my mission has been is doing research reports is really incredible and really important. But to your point, how do we connect with the community? In my work doing policy and advocacy, I understood that what we keep saying is people had to be at the table and at the center of when decisions are being made, but more importantly, at the State House. So before I started at LPI, we had never actually advocated at the State House. So the place that's making laws that we were talking about in these fancy reports had never been part of our job. And it became a central piece of not only how we set our issues, the issues of focus areas, but also how we led and supported our community organizations. One of the things that I have made a priority is that when we find a topic or issue that is important, we acknowledge first that my experience or other people's experiences is unique. But how are we making sure that we're touching base with other organizations in the state that are already doing some of this work? So we're not a grassroots org, and we're never going to be, but we're really great friends with them. So we work with Progreso Latino, we work with Amor, we work with organizations that focus on education, with young people that do incredible things, because you have to be great if you have, if you're great, if you have great friends. And it's something that I'm really proud of. In 2022, we had some of our most successful legislative year, and we helped pass incredible laws. One of them was the Rhode Island Vote, which was a package of legislation that for the first time in Rhode Island, we didn't have early voting in Rhode Island because we were yes, I know your face. Same face every day. Things in 2022, the legislature was like, oh my God, you should probably let people vote early, like 20 days early. Mail voting, we didn't have that. It was like this emergency dumb thing. And why? It's important to Latinos. It's incredibly important to underrepresented and historically marginalized communities. The leadership of Sandra Cano, we passed Cover All Kids. There's in the state of Rhode Island, if you were a child, an undocumented child under the age of 19, you do not have access to health insurance, basic health insurance, just seeing a basic doctor. That was a huge thing. And after more than 13 years, with reports that we were able to do with Roger Williams Law School and many, many partners, decades of leaders, we passed legislation to allow undocumented Rhode Islanders to be able to drive legally in the state of Rhode Island. Again, it was a huge legislative year, but it was not just us, and it was not just these fancy reports that we wrote. It took decades of humans coming together and saying to themselves what Domingo just said, taking leadership and saying, we own this is ours, and this is what it looks like when we own it. Having incredible leaders that, making laws costs a lot of heart and a lot of work, and leaders that put a lot in the line for that we'll always appreciate. But it was also, and that's what I'm really proud of the Latino Policy Institute. In the next decade, if I'm there or if I'm not, I want to continue to focus on those main issues, but also continue understanding. When I talk about LPI, I talk about the evolving needs of Latinos. This university is hosting great Latinos, but you're also hosted in an incredible city where Latinos own this city. So how is this university also evolving with Latinos?
No, that's great. Thank you so much. Domingo, I do want to give you a chance to respond, but I'm going to add a little bit, or comment as well, but I'm going to add a little bit more to the question. So as Marcela mentioned, you're one of the founders of the Latino Policy Institute. And since then, you've also spent some time in academia. One reason why we really wanted to have you on here is there are certain things that you learn, kind of being in the university, what the university is capable or not of doing. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how the Latino Policy Institute was founded, but then also whether you have a better sense of what what the university's role in community-engaged learning is, and essentially if a university wanted to work with something like the Latino Policy Institute, or maybe try to think of some type of organization, how would you start going about that?
Yeah, great question. So, the Latino Policy Institute, we created that organization because at the time we had several organizations in Providence and Rhode Island broadly dedicated to social service, providing social service needs to Latinos in Rhode Island, doing political action work, lobbying at the State House over several organizations doing that. But there was just no organization that dedicated to the actual research and producing these types of reports, which, as Marcela mentioned, only take you so far, but yet are key ingredient. Every time that we work to go to the State House to say, so where's where's the research, where's the data, and it's like, so we needed to create an organization to do that, and that's how it came about. So after several years of several of us coming together to think about this, to work on this, it finally was created. And I just have to say, which is not part of directly to your question, I want to say that I'm very proud. It's amazing to see the work that Marcela and others are doing with the LPI. We couldn't have imagined, nearly 20 years ago that this is where it was going to be. So, and that's because Marcela and others have taken it and have done what's right for the organization. So, what can an institution like Brown do? So one of the things that I think is really important, there are people here at Brown doing wonderful research and amazing research, like community-oriented, grounded research. And oftentimes, because of academia, like our job is to either produce journal articles or produce books, and it's just often not intended to a community, communicating it with the community, right? So LPI, this is what you heard from Marcela, this is what her job has become, is taking these nice reports, as she said, and to make it accessible to the community. It's what Sandra Cano was saying as well. I'm convincing leaders that this is what you need to be doing, listening to the community and talking to the community. So I think that there are researchers doing wonderful work here at Brown and probably just don't have the connection to community rooted groups like LPI. So building those connections, I think, are really important. And, I think, and this is a broader, much larger question. You're an assistant professor now, and so you're going through a process of you have to do certain things to be able to become tenured, right? And oftentimes doing that community-centered work does not get you tenured. And so within institutions, we need to be pushing against that. And those of us who are tenured, pushing for you and others to say, listen, this is a critically important work, that they're producing research that is community rooted and it's speaking to and with communities. And that needs to be incentivized, rewarded, not looked down upon. And so that is like an institutional conversation that we need to have, within our institutions about what is a type of research, what is a type of engagement that can support scholars so that they can continue to do this work. Because right now, in many places, it's not incentivized. So that's some of the things that I think we need to be thinking about.
No, that's excellent. And I think that definitely kind of speaks to my case. I was letting Parker know that when I was at Rice, I was involved with like a lot of that type of research, and now it's kind of like disappeared from my plate. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Yeah, I think, and I don't want to have us go over. We only have like a few more minutes, and I don't know if this topic, the last one I wanted to get into, we'll have enough time for that, but we can go and try. And so a lot of the things that we're mentioning today has to deal with this idea of like civic engagement, getting people involved. As like someone who studies Latino politics, I get frustrated when people kind of say that Latinos aren't necessarily amazingly politically active, right? And we can look at the reports and say they don't necessarily vote at the same rates as like compared to other groups, but we know that that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not active. And so you're talking about how there's parents kind of like wanting to get involved in the community, things like that. And so I think one of the best ways that we can actually get Latinos' voice heard is like to get voting. We have the election coming up. So I was wondering if you all could kind of talk about, like, I guess the state of, because again, I'm a newcomer here, I don't know a lot, like the state of civic engagement of Latinas in the population. What types of, are there like voter mobilization organizations kind of coming in here? And like, how can we try to study as like how to encourage that type of turnout?
So I'm going to give two perspectives. So I do believe that for a presidential general election, you will get people to vote. There is a lot of information, a lot of marketing around that. People understand and know when the election is and the stake that is at the election. So I'm going to separate it. I would say that when you look at numbers in Rhode Island for Latinos voting in November, it's totally different of a story when you look at Latinos voting in the primary in September. And I'm going to say the reason why. The reason why is because most of our Latino population are working families, and working families that really have an election on a Tuesday, random Tuesday in September, from A to A, like really doesn't make it easy for a working family that goes to work, gets out of work, pick up the kids, go do dinner, and then time is up. And even with early voting, like that is based on culture. There is a distrust of sending a mail ballot for voting. They need, I speak for my parents, more of my parents, if they don't go and vote and look at their ballot in the thing, they feel that like their vote is not gonna count. And then so it's almost like you really, if it rains on an election day and they don't vote early, like that is a factor for the Latino community. If there is a soccer game, believe it or not, that is on a Tuesday, like it happened this past election. I am serious. In the city of Pawtucket, there was a long turnout in a district because Colombia played on that Tuesday for the primary. And then so I am really serious. So like you really need to look at the civic engagement at a different ways. And as much as you send mailers and things like that, my numbers when I was elected as a school committee member, as a city council, and as a senator, my numbers were lower in a primary than it would be in a general election. That is a fact. And it's not because people don't want to exercise the right to vote. It's because of those challenging factors. So we've been talking about what can we do differently. Can we do a primary on a Saturday? Can we do it on a Sunday like they do it in their own countries of origin? Like, you know, elections in their countries of origin are on a weekend. So maybe that is a way for a look at engagement in this place. And also, let's say that it's going to be on Tuesday because we don't have the majority that thinks that we need to change that. Well, maybe we should look at a marketing campaign and dollars for marketing that goes beyond what the candidates do, because that really doesn't reach the majority of the Latinos. The Latinos really get most of the information still, I would say, that through the radio. Well, they are work. When they come home, they just put like Univision or Telemundo and they just look at that. And if you don't have the dollars to advertise there, there's misinformation out there. So I think that the engagement is there. Some people call me after the primary, like, oh, Sandrita, when is it that you need to be born? I was like, it just happened 2 days ago. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Oh, but you won, right? You won. Yeah, like those are the type of things, right?
They're just like, just checking.
I'm like, oh my God, when is the next one? So these things are real. It's not that they don't want to, it's just that they don't have this lack of these barriers, and also there is lack of information, like regardless what it is. So I think that is something that we really need to look at across the state. Where are the elections and how we are electing people with very low turnouts. Like look at the September election and look like sometimes the leaders of our state do not reflect the district where they live. Like it's just whoever does the most targeting and taking them to vote. Like that is what an election should look like. So I'm just
and I would, because I want to add to that specific point, because and one of your questions was like either mobilizing groups, to get people to vote, and there have been different Domingo mentioned it earlier too. There's different waves of when there are groups and entities that help people get information. I think one of the biggest issues, though, is that we live in a state, as Sandra mentioned, that some of our state leaders have been elected by less than 20% of the population. So that's one thing that to hold in mind. The second thing is, and she did not do this because she was a great elected official and she will be again one day. But the problem is that we have elected officials that only remember they have to come to work every 2 to 4 years. And so that's what I think the problem is. I have parents that when they became citizens, their biggest homework was to go and vote. This was a big thing and they would ask me about it. Nevertheless, the only people that they would see, so they live in the city of Central Falls, was the person who was running for mayor. Nobody else. They would never see anybody else. The people who were running for Senate or legislature or even their city council. Again, the politics are local. All these local people would never come. The same thing. I live in the city of Providence today. And my state legislator comes, but I have never seen anybody else. And that is a problem. It is a problem that they forget that that Latinos exist every 2 to 4 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I feel like I could.
You're right.
Yes.
I mean, I feel like I could just like sit here and talk with you all day, but I want to make sure that the audience has time for a Q&A. So I can go ahead and take some questions if anyone has any. Yes, Professor Schiller.
So this is, sorry. This is for Senator Cano. I know you just stepped down. So as an outsider watching the primary for the 1st Congressional District and thinking about that, your commercials to me were just the sweet spot of, issues that every voter would be concerned about. I didn't see them as overly targeted to any particular group when you were advertising. And do you think that, looking at that election, you had very strong women who are Latina running, but against each other. Mm-hmm. And it's just an interesting dynamic. And when you look ahead, when you think about the future, because of course, the Latino vote is so important, even if they only remember every 2 or 4 years. Can you tell us a little bit about that campaign experience? And then thinking about, do you think that the Latino community, if you could think of it as a unified community, it was a missed opportunity to have somebody of Latino descent who won that primary, who would then pretty much win the seat?
So thank you for the question, Professor, and thank you for all your great commentary during the congressional elections. So 2 things I would say. I was very intentional about my messaging and very proud about really portraying a messaging that really reflects the need of the state as a proud member of a working family, as a mother, as a Latina, as an immigrant. So I wanted to make sure that I show my track record of being in every public office, going for the big seat. I probably was the one that has the most experience across the whole list of 12 candidates. Like if you think about my track record and like really my work and the policies and the effective way that I've been able to work with every different political parties even. Like I was criticized, I remember, for having endorsed as a candidate for having been endorsed by Republicans. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, that council member in North Providence, it might be more a conservative council member, but I am able to, without compromising my values, be able to have a conversation to affect change for our community. And that's what you need in Congress. So to answer your question, first of all, when this election came in, it was historic. Like you just don't see congressional elections popping up every 2 years. Like it's every decade. So yes, I had a 3-month-old baby, and it was always my dream to become a congressperson. That was really when I did my first Latina Leadership Institute course, and I was able to look at what politics was. I was like, one day I want to be in Congress. So this wasn't a thing that I'm just gonna do it to do it. It was intentional that I was learning through the process. But when you see 2 Latinas or 3 Latinas in the name, for me to talk to Domingo with Marcela, it was a way to celebrate that our community has been beyond the only one candidate. So every time that a newspaper would ask me, like, what's it, like, you think it's an opportunity for having 2 Latinas? I was like, no, you need to celebrate that there is 2 qualified Latinas in the ballot. And even when you look at the results, I mean, I came third. I can guarantee you that if I would have the dollars to really get to the people. Like I was very outspent. I only had $350,000. Gabe, which is a good friend, he spent like $1.5 million. And then if you talk about Aaron Regenberg, that was second, it was like 1.8 or something like that. So I was really outspent. So if I really have those dollars, I only imagine what we could have done. And maybe we would have an opportunity to have a Latino in Congress today. I love the work that our congressman is doing. And I think that he's right for our district. But I just think that the missed opportunity really wasn't having two Latinos in the ballot. The missed opportunity wasn't not to have the money power to just get to the people in a special election. Yeah. Because to your point, special elections are tough because people don't know and they don't come out to vote. Like, that is it. Like, I saw in my own community. So I think that it's for us to wrap around and look at, yes, it's challenging for Latinos to run races when you don't come from money, when you don't have, like, you know, a lot of people to invest in you and believe in you. My donation, I was proud. I have $200. $50, like $100. I wasn't mass out like money like that. I just didn't have it. But I was proud of having a grassroots. And I think that we need to continue celebrating that now we're at a time where we're gonna see two women of color running for mayor, two women of color running for the same position, and that is to celebrate. Like, we've been waiting for that time. When it was only one here and one there, we were waiting for that kind of numbers, and we are here today, I think. So I'm excited about that. Thank you for the question.
Hi, I'm Scott Wolf, and I know several members of the panel and have great regard for them. I have an impression that may be wrong, and that's why I'm going to see if you can set me straight. But my impression is that the Latino population in Rhode Island, it has a higher portion of recent arrivals to the U.S. than, say, the Latino population in Texas or the Latino population in Illinois, and that may be one of the reasons, other than a lot of racism and structural barriers, but that may be one of the reasons why incomes are so relatively low for the Latino population and educational attainment is so relevant. Is that a factor? Or is that not a factor?
Yeah, I would say it partly is. And I remember I looked into this like 2 years ago, and of course it's not in my brain, so that's embarrassing. But yes, so I do think so. I remember like the history of, you know, Latinos. Well, Latinos have been coming to Rhode Island for a century. But when large groups of Latinos started arriving, to your point, it's been like maybe 80 years, 70 years. It's still freshly new compared to Texas, California, so many other places where in many cases they were natives there. And so I do think that, to your point, that may be part of it. We see second generations of Latinos here. Yet, and thank you for saying it, there are still structural barriers and racism that's stopping us. The divestment in education goes back to it again. But I do think that that's a barrier. I also thank you for saying that, because I also want to say that I never want to talk about my people in a deficit manner. My people are amazing. Like, we are so great. And so Latinos are not just like these poor uneducated people in the state of Rhode Island, like not at all. Look at like the three of us. I'm the most humble one here, apparently. Like, these two people are great. And so I just want to remind us of that. So yes. So as you know, compared to the rest of the country, our incomes may be lower. We're still in struggling in a few places. But I do think that if we don't have leaders like we have in this table, in the next 20 to 30 years, I don't know if we are going to be in a better place, not just because it's Rhode Island, but looking at New England in general, the entire region is growing, but we're seeing a huge divestment in so many other pieces that can grow. And that's why we have individuals that look like us that need to run for office. They need to be part of universities. They need to be part of policy making. So yeah, I do. I think that, to your point, we're still young in this state, but.
And Scott, just to piggyback, I would say that Marcela is so right, but there is also a lot of misconceptions when it comes to the buying power of Latinos and also the contributions of Latino to our state. So there is a lot of misunderstanding from Rhode Islanders. Like, you know, Latinos, if you ever want to go to an immigration process, you have to pay taxes. So most of the Latino population that are working, they all pay taxes and they don't get any benefit out of those taxes. And then so we're talking about 17 years waiting for a driver's license to be passed. You know how Marcela and I did it? by showing the power of the taxes that were paid by Latinos, and they're the ones that are getting the driver's license today. So we attach it to the IT number taxpayers. I was like, that is the only way that we're going to be able to convince the conservative Democrats in our chamber. That's the only way. Showed it them
$3
through data.
$3 million a year undocumented people bring to the state.
Exactly. So if we don't tell them that, then that legislation, it has nothing to do with driving license. It has to do with income. Like, imagine that, with the income. That was the only way that we were able to tie that. And then so we need to be creative every way to show the contributions of Latinos and immigrants to the state. Like, that really affects how we pass policy. The same thing with healthcare for all kids. You know why they pass it? Not because, well, we know why it was important to pass it, but not because they really care about undocumented kids in the school not having insurance.
They didn't care about that.
It wasn't about that. You know why? Because we were able to prove that now the state pays more in emergency visits, because then we are being not proactive. If we give them an insurance, then we already being proactive about their health. But then if we don't give them insurance, guess what? We still ended up paying emergency visits, and it was more costly to pay the emergency visits to cover them through insurance. That is the reality. It comes to economics. So it is sad to say that, but that is how it works. And now I'm able to say it because now I'm a former senator. But that is the data and the work that we did together. But yes.
Thank you all so much for being here and for all the work that you do. And as an educator, someone who teaches at Brown, and I see students in the class, this is a classroom too. I'm really interested to know, or to sort of build off of what Domingo was saying already, which is that our students teach us as teachers. We've got to listen to our students. And I'd like to know, what are some ways that you think students at Brown University, not just those who are from the area, but who have made this area their home and who have been welcomed here by the community, can give back? What are some of the most impactful ways you think that they can get involved, whether it's with the Latino Policy Institute, with state government, with voter outreach, because it's something I'd love to help happen.
We need to make sure that the students that are getting the best education here stay in Rhode Island.
That's true.
That's the first thing. I don't know what we need to do collectively, but a lot of the students that are getting education here from Rhode Island or from outside Rhode Island, most of them leave. We need to retain them. You think that I am thrilled about Hasbro saying right now that the reason why they want to probably leave or they don't know is because of talent acquisition? Because Rhode Island doesn't have talent. We have it. We just need to make sure we retain them. So what are we doing to retain the talent that you as a professor and your students are having, and make sure that Rhode Island is the attractive place because they want to stay, contribute to Rhode Island, and make Rhode Island their permanent home? That is a challenge that I still don't know how to click, to be able to work government and private sector together with the school. We need to come up with a creative way to make sure that that is no longer a question. That is the first thing that I would say.
Yeah, I like that. And because I think we have that issue here at Brown, but also in even our own state colleges. I think what I would say from my experience of hosting some Brown students as Bonner Fellows and just sort of being here, one, I want to go back to what Domingo said, and I'd love to be able to highlight and elevate research that is done here by students and or professors. That is huge. I don't have to own it, but I can be like, look at what this really cool thing that's because somebody should see them incredible things that are happening. I didn't know that. That's amazing. How are you keeping this to yourself? Nobody should keep that stuff to yourself. So that's one. The other one is the Bonner Fellows that we've had have all been Latino descent, and one of the things, and none of them have been from the state of Rhode Island, and the thing that moves me is when they come to my tiny little baby org and they say they feel like home and they're able to be themselves. And I say that I went to Rhode Island College, which today is a Hispanic serving institution. It means 25% of the students are Latino. Back many years ago when I first started going there, they were not. and I could not be myself in my classrooms. I was a poli-sci major, and it was the first time I ever went to school with white people. So it was a shock. But I couldn't be myself, and I couldn't ask questions. I couldn't be curious, and my colleagues couldn't be curious either. So I don't, again, this is me also just sharing, I don't know what that looks like at Brown and at other institutions. Are you allowing for space for curiosity, for individuals to be themselves? They're very diverse selves of what Latino means, if you're from California, from Oregon, from Chicago, like wherever you're from, what does that look like to be Latino in your classroom? And so I think that's a really important thing. I know that through different courses, you have access to some community organizations, but I do think that in not just this college, again, I do think the university can do a better job to make sure that you're there, not just to check off the box, but be there. You have things to teach us, but so do we. Like, just because I don't have a fancy degree doesn't mean I don't have a thing to teach you. And so I think that's something that's really important.
And I just want to add to that. I mean, so Brown has had just a wonderful history over the past, I think you were saying at least through the 1970s, but we can even go beyond before that, about students wanting to do good work in the community. And so we need to acknowledge that there's a history there. It'd be great if there's more opportunities, which I think is part of your question here. How do we get that? But I think it's really important to acknowledge that for decades, Brown students have been really engaged in the community. And so I think it all starts with, in terms of advice to the students, is that I think it's connected to what Marcela was just saying now, is so there's wealth of knowledge and resources in these communities, and it's often not presented in that way. And what I think would be wonderful to continue to happen and grow is that students that are Brown students who have a wealth of knowledge and experience are idealistic about the world, that they take that energy, that enthusiasm, and root themselves in the community, learn from the community, and then make an assessment at that point is how is it that I can help. But it first comes with you learning about the community, being in true community with that community, to then be able to make decisions about where is it that I'm going to help. And then maybe that leads them to stay here. And we know many, right? You start families and stuff like that, right? Yeah. And they decide to stay. But I think it all begins with that, the acknowledgement that there's knowledge here, there's wisdom here, there's resources, a wealth of resources that you're not coming in necessarily to be a savior, but to be in community. And that community is always going to welcome your help, always.
Well, I think that is a great way to end, actually. Thank you all so much. Let's go ahead and give another round of applause for our panelists. I believe there are refreshments outside of the meeting.
Yeah, and I also wanted to thank Marques for doing this, to our panelists, and more particularly to Maria Isabel Marin, who organized all of this, who arranged for the amazing refreshments we're going to have outside. So I hope folks can stick around and chat a little bit more relajadamente amongst ourselves. And thank you again.
Yeah.